All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to First Tuesdays. Since nothing happened today, I have to think about some stuff to talk about, but I'm confident we can do it. I'm Mick with ProPublica, Illinois.
And I am Ben Jarofsky with the Reader and WCPT.
To those of you who've been here before, thank you so much for coming back, and for the newcomers, welcome. We always have a good time, and the theme of this is a bunch of people talking politics in a bar. So that's what we do.
And all right. Usually there's a man named Tim Tutton, who's the owner of the Hideout, who gives recitation. He's not here right now, so we'll just jump right in. It is his bar, so he gets to talk. Ronald Reagan in 1980. Maybe two people in this place know that reference. All right, so Mick asked me to do the introductions today, and we'll jump into the issues of the day. On my left, State Representative Christian Mitchell, and who is also the executive director of the Illinois Democratic Party and is the record holder for appearances on First Tuesdays. I want to say this is Christian. Oh, 2014. I think he was, whatever. Anyway,
and he's only been heckled at one of them.
Yes, that was the first one.
So.
And then on my right on the stage, but not on the political spectrum, Sameena Mustafa, who was a candidate for Congress in the 5th Congressional District in the Democratic primary of March 20th, ran against incumbent Congressman Mike Quigley. And she is a regular on my radio show once a month. Sameena comes on, we talk politics. She's a political junkie, political activist from sort of the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. And can I say this? Yeah. And she herself will be hosting her own political talk show on WCPT. Yeah, she cut a deal. Okay, let me see, I'm doing this from memory. Sundays at 1.
Yes.
Right? Sundays at 1. So, congratulations.
To the left with Sameena and Shauna. So
right, to
gotta
the
get
left.
The plug.
Again, yeah, to the left. So she's on my right, up here on stage, but politically speaking, she's very much, I guess we're sort of to your left. Christian can't believe there's anyone to my left. So anyway, Christian Mitchell, Sameena Mustafa.
All right.
Mick, you want to ask the first question?
Well, yeah, exactly. Something happened today. All right, so we'll treat this like it was, the big historic event. You know, for our generation, it's like, where were you when Reagan was shot? For others, it's Kennedy. So where were you when Ron made this announcement? You heard that Ron wasn't running again, Christian.
Wow. Well, so I don't know how to start that introduction. I feel like I should start by saying that I can announce tonight that my announcement is going to go to my endorsement is going to go to our very own Ben Jarofsky from here in 2019. Make TIFs great again. Okay. I was in the DPI office, working on trying to get Democrats elected up and down the ballot, and heard, as everyone else did, sort of through the press, what was happening. I sort of heard a murmur about it a few moments before, but like everyone else, it's a bit of a political earthquake, no question. Mayors of Chicago don't generally step down before, they've been in office.
Death?
Well, I mean, or you've been in office as long as, like, I don't know, Tywin Lannister. Like, that's generally like when folks think about stepping down. So in that sense, it is certainly unusual. So yeah, that's where I was.
Sameena.
So I actually got the scoop from my co-host Shauna. We're on the phone. She's like, I just got an email that Ron's not running. And but I think, Ben, I guess your former sister paper, Fran Spielman wrote an article about a week ago. And there were two articles. There was one about Ron potentially not running, and then there's one about Pat O'Connor. It was an interview with Pat O'Connor. I felt like, oh, that's it. This is a trial balloon. This is the signal that he may not run. So I thought, oh, okay, here we have it, the announcement. Now, I didn't know it was going to happen today, but this, as some people were reminding us all, that it was about 8 years ago that Daley decided not to run. And it's kind of when you think about people who decide not to run, like the LBJs and the Mayor Daley's and the Roms, it's something, they're facing headwinds. So it wasn't a shock.
Well, that's funny you should mention the Pat O'Connor. I hadn't thought about it that way, but the Pat O'Connor, she's alluding to, of course, Alderman Patrick O'Connor from the 40th Ward in North Side of Chicago, who was Mayor Rom's floor leader, and before that he was Mayor Daley's floor leader. So he was responsible as any alderman in the city council for articulating the reason behind some of the initiatives, and I'm really cleaning up my language here because Christian's sitting here, for some of the...
You're gonna do that for me, man, I'm a boxer.
For some of the initiatives like the parking meter sale, et cetera, trying to put a good spin on it. And so, in retrospect, I guess you're right that you can read those interviews where Patrick O'Connor talked about how difficult it was to be in city politics these days, as though all the aldermen were victimized by sort of like the politics of Trump, et cetera, et cetera. So you're right, in retrospect, maybe they were giving a good excuse or a reason for why they were stepping up.
And then tomorrow, what's starting? It's the Jason Van Dyke trial. So we've got, I mean, there's a lot, and the timing of this is there are no accidents. Rom's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing, and I'm sure he's got something in the works, but it's one of those things where to have to go to that trial during an election, I don't think he would have not fared well in the press.
Christian, you already look like you're ready to jump in.
It's not my job to defend the mayor, so not really. I would say, here's what I would say. I would say that I can't get into the mayor's head. I can't do that, won't do that, don't want to try, not my job, not a psychologist. But I think the idea that he was anything other than the favorite in this election is probably erroneous. That's just not what the data shows. This is a guy whose job approval was above 50%. This is a guy who's been above 50% with African Americans for the last year or so. I don't know why he decided not to run or what would have made him run, but I think that the guy made a decision and he's out, and now we get to see democracy in Chicago. What I'm interested in seeing from any candidate is, what is your plan? Right? When you've got a budget that's 2/3 of which is spent on public safety, and if you wanted to cut that particular part of the budget, you'd be to the right of Chewy Garcia. Like, what is your plan? I think for people in my community, my district that I represent, that's going to be the interest, is not just sort of like, are you the anti-Rom, but what is your plan for the city of Chicago? And I think we've got a real chance for democracy to break out in the city, and I think that's the exciting thing about what happened today.
And before, it was pretty much who is the anti-Rom. I mean, up until today, right? I mean, that was how people were positioning themselves.
I think that's right. I mean, I think it was going to be Rom versus the field. And I think now, the obviously not having an extraordinarily experienced, really good fundraising incumbent in means that there's more opportunity for more people. But it also means you actually have to run a campaign now. Like, you actually have to have ideas and policy platforms. You are actually going to be measured and scored on how you want to implement your agenda. What if you're running as a progressive, if you're running as a corporate Democrat, whatever you want to run as, you now have to sort of score your plan, say to people, here's what I want to do, here's how I'm going to pay for it, here is why I can move this city forward in a way that the other guys and gals can't. And I think that is actually, again, kind of somewhat exciting.
Yeah, and I think we have different Facebook feeds and different folks we're talking to. I literally was ding dong, the witch is dead, was my Facebook feed today. It was just joy. And people were thrilled, but there were also some people like, hey, it's time for us to organize. It's time for us to say who is going to lead this city. So not to completely disagree with Christian. I mean, there is, I think, a genuine like, okay, who's going to lead the city? Who's going to take us to what's next? Who's going to deal with the problems very real problems that we have? So I mean, I think, but my sense was that it was more. There were a lot more people who were upset at what he had done. CTU's statement, if you saw their press conference. I think it was hard for Jesse Sharkey to stay in his skin. He seemed pretty thrilled about what happened from what I could see. And I think there's a lot of people who are surprised. There was a woman who called into, I won't name the station, but I won't do it.
It wasn't WCPT.
No, it wasn't. That's why I'm never going to name it. I'm not going to hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
But she was
Your
calling.
my feelings.
Yeah.
You're
As of October 28th, that'll be my feelings too. But she said, I was at the Armitage Brown Line station, and there were people standing out there to sign, get people to sign Rom's petitions, and no one would sign. That's Lincoln Park. I mean, that's if any place is going to be Rom country, it's going to be Lincoln Park.
Let me just say a couple of things here. So one is, it's not a Facebook feed issue. I'm not taking a stance on this. What I'm saying is, based on the survey research, the data that I've seen, this is where we are. And what I would say is, Lincoln Park actually wasn't necessarily Rom country. What was Rom country was the south and west sides of Chicago, right? It just was. Rom took over 60% of the vote in black and brown neighborhoods, and so what I would caution for progressives who are running, and what I want to see is, what is your plan that is also inclusive?
Wait, I just have to interrupt you to correct you, and I know there must be a millennial in this room with access to a cell phone to prove me correct. If you look at 2015, Rom versus Chewy, look at the 43rd Ward, look at the 42nd Ward, look at the 44th Ward. Rom scored far higher in those three wards, and you know the 42nd Ward because that encroaches on your state legislative district, than he did in any black ward.
It's not true.
He won the whole north lakefront except for Rogers Park, except for the 49th Ward.
Guys, again,
millennial in this room?
I want to be very, very clear. So here's what I'm saying.
I know.
I'm looking enough.
I know my district, right? And he swept my district.
He may have won a majority.
No. I'm talking 58 to 60.
All right, let's bet right now he got a higher percentage of
That's
votes
not the-
in
that's
the
not the
43rd Ward, which is Lincoln Park.
Right, it is true that he won the runoff against Chewy Garcia because of the black vote.
Correct.
Yes.
So all I'm saying
But
is,
we can agree on
But the
that, right?
heart and soul
Look
of
at
his
me, I
vote
should
was
run
the
for mayor.
43rd,
This
42nd.
fortune-
totally, and this isn't a defense. What I'm saying
No,
is,
no.
look, as somebody.
Ben is railing on the millennial.
hot, man.
I feel like this is one of my famous Christian bets that I could actually win.
He does lose a lot. All I'm saying is, we need to make sure, bets, not like others, right? It's my guy. What I'm saying is, whoever is running for mayor needs to be thinking not just about what wins the north side, what wins millennials. I want a conversation about what is also good and inclusive for my community as well. That is something that is necessary to pull together this coalition, because it has been a challenge for progressives in these sort of seats nationwide.
Okay, I completely agree with that point, but at this point I'd like to ask you this question. This starts with my assumption, which you may be free to disagree with, as you might. And that is that Rom governed to the right of where most quote-unquote liberals, lefties, progressives, whatever you want to call them, are living in the city of Chicago. And that was a great reason why people were dissatisfied with his performance. I think the real heart and soul, the base of the Democratic Party that you now represent. So my question to you is, do you want to see when you talk about the policies being implemented by the other candidates, what would you like to see some of those policies be?
So let me disagree and agree with you. So the way in which I'm going to disagree, again, I'm going to push back, and this is again just a data issue, right? So when you talk about the base of the Democratic Party, it is actually in Cook County, it is African American women, right? And according to polling data, there is like the mayor who just left is extremely popular with those folks. And part of that is because organizing is necessary, right? On the issues. If we want to see Medicare for all, if we want to see free college, we want to see if those are issues that you care about, there's more organizing work that needs to be done to make sure that after sort of the first battery on the pole, when people start talking about cost, you keep the base intact and whole, right? So in that area, I would say that is work that we need to do. It's organizing that people like Reclaim Chicago have been doing that I think is good, right? The part where I agree with you, I think, is I think the Democratic Party has been too dismissive of the left generally and of millennials specifically. The idea is sort of that we are off in this fantasy land. I'm including myself as a millennial in this sense. And I think that having a real policy conversation is good and necessary and needs to happen. And so I think, for example, when you see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez go on CNN and say, look, my belief is that in a modern moral society, no one should be too poor to live. I think almost every Democrat agrees with that. I think where the disagreement might come in is how we get there. And so I think that we should not be afraid of that conversation. What I want to do in this role, what I want to see for the Democratic Party nationally, and the DNC was just here last week, is let's engage in that conversation, not be afraid of it, not be so concerned about losing the so-called moderate middle that we are not willing to have conversations about how we can bring our base in closer to the party and figure out a way to change public opinion in ways that make life better for middle-class people.
So I think to speak to your point about African American women, I think that's why we need more black women in leadership in the party at all levels. And so, you know, Barbara Lee threw her hat in the ring to be head of the Democratic caucus. Like that's where we need to go. Instead of Nancy Pelosi slapping Maxine Waters' wrist, she needs to say, like, yes, it is unacceptable for the president or anyone to come after her. I mean, that's what we need is to have a Democratic Party that's actually celebrating its core voters, its base. I mean, I was in New Orleans a few weeks ago at Netroots Nation and experienced some of the challenges with the progressive movement is that there were several black activists who stormed the stage at the end of the keynote. They actually were they were on just before Ocasio and said, hey, you aren't listening to us. You've scheduled panels that compete with each other, so we can't organize. And so I think there's a real challenge with the Democratic Party, knowing that its base is people of color and marginalized people and not giving those people leadership opportunities and centering their issues. And so I think there's an opportunity, and it could start here in Illinois. I think a lot of people are surprised at the infrastructure that we have and don't have to bring women and women of color into leadership.
So so I agree with a lot of what Sameena just said. I think it's incredibly important. And one of the things that I'm looking at doing some hires through DPI, and I think you're going to see them reflect the diversity of our state, including myself. One of the things I want to just highlight here is that there is actually there is a sub-problem, right? Not just in the Democratic Party, but in the progressive movement specifically, right? The one that I care about and consider myself a part of. When you look at, again, I'm going straight to numbers, which is everywhere in Michigan, where there were large numbers of African Americans, Abdul Sayed got blown out. Everywhere in Chicago, and frankly nationwide, where there are large numbers of African Americans, Bernie Sanders got blown out. Everywhere in New York, in Ocasio-Cortez's district, where there were large numbers of African Americans, Joe Crowley did his best. So there is a sort of underlying conversation about how people who look like me feel more reflected and represented inside the progressive movement of the Democratic Party. That is an ongoing challenge, and that is not my opinion. That is what the data says. And so that's something that we need to continue to work on, that I'm dedicated to.
Except for Florida.
Yeah,
and
Georgia.
Georgia was Stacey.
Hold on. Andrew Gillum was an early supporter of Hillary Clinton, was a delegate of hers, sort of turned in the, and that's all I'm saying is, you don't, that's not one I would necessarily say is representative of the broader problem, right? I think Stacey Abrams ran in a way that was to the left of the expectations of Georgia, but still sort of to the right of some of the candidates that we just mentioned. It's not an ideological issue. What I'm saying is there is an issue in terms of getting votes in cases where the candidate is not African American and where the issue says a little bit off to the left. So we just need to close that gap. I think organizing is an incredibly important part of doing that.
What's missing there in the communication? What was missing from Bernie's message or from the messenger, or what happened?
So I want to be very clear that this next thing I say is a series of speculation, right? So I think a couple things. I think one is the messenger does matter, right? The examples we just cited, Andrew Gillum, Stacey Abrams, are both African Americans, right? So I think that there is a struggle in the party about whether we're going toward class politics or identity politics. I think it is a false narrative and one where we have to sort of weave both things in, right? You cannot talk to me merely about class struggles in African American, because I know in so many cases that my race plays in a way that just overstrips my class, right? So I think making sure, as Sameena said, that we have more candidates who are reflective of people of color matters. I also think, and this is less true of African American millennials, though still true based on sort of data and focus groups, there is I think black folks are more capitalistic than people think, right? I think that this sort of move toward the idea of government doing much more is a struggle for some folks. And I think that, for example, I am in government because I believe that is the biggest thing that we do together. When we give up on it, give up on ourselves. That if we're going to meet the challenges of the 21st century, whether they be war and peace, climate change, economic uncertainty, that government needs to play a large and activist role in doing that. But I also think that for some people, when there is a declining trust in government in the electorate generally, right? And when you have black folks who have not always seen government work for them in the way that it should, have been excluded from, we talk about needing like a Green New Deal or a New Deal in general. African Americans were excluded from that, and from the GI Bill, and from every sort of major, large expansion of government help anytime in the last 40 or 50 years. When you have that sort of institutional memory, there is work and organizing that has to be done to convince people that government doing more means more than just more tax dollars out of my pocket. It means critical investments in my community and in my quality of life. And I think that if we do that work, we can get to a place where you start to see these two movements that are currently divergent start to merge.
I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm going to say it kind of in a different way. I think what you're seeing is not necessarily, oh, we don't trust government, or we're more capitalist. It's more that both parties have let us down. Both parties have.
Sorry, it's not what I'm saying, but
I know, but I'm going to extend what you're saying.
Please.
And the fact is, I have talked to people of all backgrounds and seen people's dissatisfaction and disillusionment with all parties, is that they don't feel like they're represented. And I think it's not so much that they have this mistrust of government. I think it's more that they don't trust who's in government. I think that there is the concept of solutions. Absolutely, the New Deal failed people of color tremendously. I mean, even just the way things like the minimum wage was structured in terms of excluding agricultural workers and domestic workers. But I think there is a different discourse that's happening right now, and I think what I feel as someone who's been a candidate and is talking to people who want to run, there's a sense that whatever the people want, 85% of people are supporting, Democrats are supporting Medicare for all. I mean, that's a huge number. 52% of Republicans are supporting Medicare for all. Why is that not something that all Democrats are supporting?
So, what I would say, I think, is what I want to be very clear. What I'm pushing back on is sort of like the sort of hard, difficult conversation we need to have to get to the place we need to go. Because I think we actually, for the most part, agree on where that place is. And it's, for example, in the initial poll, when you say, do you support the concept of Medicare for all? People, yeah, 85%, et cetera, go for it. Now then, when you simulate the messaging that the Koch brothers and everybody else is going to do pushing back on it, you talk about what it would require in terms of taxes, what it would require in terms of spending and individual sort of allocations, that's when that number tends to sort of drop off a cliff. So what I'm suggesting is, whether it is making sure that African Americans feel more included in the progressive movement, or making sure that we have a sustainable, durable coalition that can endure attacks on things like expanding healthcare access, et cetera, we've got some groundwork to do. And if we are unwilling to face the depth of that groundwork, and if we are unwilling to talk about the scale of it, to say that we've got the ideas and why aren't we winning already, we will continue to spin the hamster wheel in the way that we have. So what I'm suggesting is, I don't disagree with the underlying premise of what you're saying, but there is work to be done, both to get people to the right place and to make sure that they stay there in the face of withering attack.
And again, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying that there are people who want. Here's the problem. There are people who want to do that work, and they aren't being welcomed in the party or in the structure. There are women who ran for office in this last cycle. I can think of at least 2 districts. One was like Evanston and Wilmette, and one was in the South Loop, where women of color were running, and the Madigan machine came after them, period. They're negative mailers. I mean, that's where you have to, my question is, what do you do with that momentum? There's a record number of women running. There's a record number of people of color running. What do you do with that energy? There are people who are passionate. They are willing to make those sacrifices. And the party, in Illinois at least, and the machine is telling them, we don't want you. And we're going to shut you down. Because we didn't pick you. We didn't send you. Right.
Yeah, so I'd say a couple things on this. So one is, Abner Vickfeld once famously said, we don't want nobody who nobody sent. That's actually not true. The truth is, we don't want nobody who nobody sent who thinks they're somebody. So if you come in, I'm just being real. And so if you come in and say, well, I've got a degree from, and this was me for a minute, right? I've got a degree from University of Chicago, like, I know the policy stuff, I'm smart, so like, I should just be in office right now because of like the stuff that I've done and the degree that I have, like, you're going down, right? Now, from the other hand, you walk into somebody's campaign office or the party office and say, look, I will cut walk sheets, I will make coffee, I will do whatever is necessary to figure out what it takes to win, you can advance up through the ranks. I came from nowhere, right? And worked my way up through the office of Tony Preckwinkle and others, right, who gave me a chance, gave me a shot, and here I am. That's not to say it's the only way to do it. It is to say that there is sort of this idea that you just jump into politics and instantly you're ready to go. And in some cases, it's not the case. What I would also say is statistically, we have the most diverse slate that we have ever had at any point this year in Democratic politics in Illinois. With women, with people of color, we have a chance, if everyone wins, I think, to make the House either right on the cusp of or right at about 50% women. So to say that there's no progress being made is just inaccurate. And to say that someone just sort of comes out of nowhere, runs for office, and the party ought to be like, cool,
No.
It's just not how it works.
And that's not what I said. What I'm saying is, right now we're at 20% in Congress, and we have equally abysmal numbers in state legislatures and city council and all these. The only way that's going to change is if people, men, usually white men, step aside and are nurturing women to be leaders. When I think of, I've talked to people all over the country, and their impression of Chicago and Illinois is that we have this robust incubator that is mentoring women and people of color. They think that because like, oh yeah, Obama was here, of course there's going to be 1 million incubators. No, there's maybe one. And so that is what I'm saying, is that aside from sort of being part of that sort of process, and I will tell you honestly, there were some people who worked on my campaign. That was the very first campaign they ever worked on, because it was somebody they knew who was working on it. And now a lot of the folks that are on my campaign, they're helping people like Maria Haddon, who is, would be, if she's elected, she would be the first Black lesbian alderwoman on the North Side. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I think gets people excited, because it's someone they know and they feel like they're part of a history change, a history making campaign. And I think that's really, it's more than saying, no, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be president one day like Donald Trump did, but it's really about saying, what is the process? What is the huh?
In terms of helps you really rich.
Yeah, it does.
Have
But I
a reality show.
mean, how do we tell women, specifically and especially now? I mean, I look at women like Elena Hampton. I think about the cases that are still pending, and I think, how do women know that if they show up at a campaign office, or if they're working at a legislator's office, that they're going to be safe?
Yeah. So I think a couple things on this, and I would start off by saying that Elena's a friend of mine, and when I was announced for this role, I actually put out a statement in support of it, which I was flattered by. What we've done is,
and it should be said that you came into this role in the wake of Elena Hampton and some of the other mismanagement, is not really an adequate word, by the Madigan and Democratic Party.
Yeah, and I think a couple things on this. So on the state side, I was part of the Sexual Harassment Task Force, which put forward a series of recommendations that have been adopted to take legislators out of the ethics process and make sure that there's this very sort of clear, transparent pipeline by which to get complaints dealt with. I think on the campaign side, for example, when I was put in this role, I did a training that took me about a day. That was sort of all sexual harassment training that I think was good, comprehensive. We also implemented controls that basically say anyone with any supervisory authority, even in a volunteer capacity, has to go through the same rigorous training, which is not true of any of the 49 other Democratic parties across the state. Now, is that enough? Not even close. And what I want to do, and I've said this in multiple places, is I want to make sure that the changes necessary to make women feel safer and valued in these spaces are led and ordered by women. So that committee is still ongoing. We've got this outside committee with Susana Mendoza and a couple other folks I can't remember who are looking at additional measures on the campaign side. I want to lean on them in terms of what needs to happen next. And I think that what I feel my responsibility is, in addition to my professional one, is as a man, not a white man, but still a man, I need to be talking to other men and saying, here is why this is important. And here, by the way, is what it's cost us. All of the women who otherwise would have run for office already, would be in positions of power, would be on staff, but did not because they did not feel safe. That is not just a cost to them, it's a cost to me, it's a cost to you, it's a cost to everyone across this state. That's my role. in sort of figuring this out, but ultimately I need to listen. What men do too often is we take up all the space in the room and we start talking about what all the solutions are. I want to listen to what it is I need to be doing, and that's what I've tried to practice in this role. So.
I want to touch on something that Christian alluded to, bring it back, and Sameena, get your thoughts on this. We were talking, I forget what part of the conversation, but why Bernie Sanders didn't do so well in the black community, and Hillary did clean his clock in 2016. The point you made, and I'm paraphrasing, is that maybe there's a pro-capitalistic streak among black voters that Bernie was going up against, and that's partly explains. I would suggest that's a misread of what happened in 2016. And we've had on this stage, oh my goodness, Alderman Sawyer, Brian Sleet, at various times have chided the Democratic Party for its anti-government positions, have chided progressives and liberals for being quote-unquote anti-patronage, when in fact it's these good patronage Democratic jobs that John Stroger passed out. That was
He's chomping at the bit.
I'm just telling you, Brian Slade and Rod Sawyer. Okay, these good Democratic jobs are the key to the middle class. So many middle class black neighborhoods. Okay, Rod Sawyer, Brian Slade, they all said this, and I tend to agree with them on this point. So I find it hard to believe.
That's on camera, Ben.
That's not the first time I've said it.
Well, and the decline of this system, I mean, I and others have documented this, the number of city and public sector jobs that have been cut have disproportionately happened in middle class neighborhoods.
When they would have been
Just one big overarching statistic is that public sector, and I said this in the wake of Janice, public sector unions nationwide, 18% of them are African American women. They are overrepresented in public sector unions, so when you start cutting back on those jobs...
Those are the people who pay the price, and those are the neighborhoods that pay the price.
I have more
When Ron privatized those water department jobs, it was Alderman Sawyer who led the charge against them, forcing them to backtrack on that. And so I have a hard time believing that it was because of an pro-capitalist streak that Bernie didn't do well. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it just came out, was it just this week or last week, the Jackman decree? I know we've got some Cook County devs in the audience, but that there was a request to get that released from the county, and that, I guess 2014 is when the city was released. Look, I'm the daughter of two city workers, and it was meaningful that they were able to have, kind of safe government jobs, and were able to establish themselves in a city, in a country that really it was going to be hard for them to navigate corporate America. And so I think I'm not going to rail on people of color and immigrants coming into the financial system. The corruption is obviously the issue, but I think going back to the figure that you just shared, it does disproportionately hurt immigrants and people of color when these things are privatized or when these jobs go away. And because if you look at corporate America, I mean, I'm trying to remember, it's like, I know there was a black woman who was CEO of Xerox, and Nui just said she was going to resign as head of PepsiCo. It's a very white power structure. So you see it across the board. And so when people are saying that they are, whether you want to say capitalist or not, I've talked to people in many different sectors, whether it's in the hospital industry, marketing, corporations. I talked to a woman just this week who works at a nonprofit theater, and she says, I'm basically the token black woman, and I'm the one who has to speak for all black people on diversity. So there's a real problem with race in this country, and we're not dealing with it. Yeah, I know. Shocking.
You heard it here first.
There was a really incredible writer and speaker. Her name's Miriam Kaba, and she has this phrase that I love, which is "racism is the weather." It's literally, it's everywhere. And when I heard that, I was like, well, what can I do to change the forecast? What can I do? On my own team, I had my leaders were women, and half of them were women of color. One of my closest advisors was a black woman. it's what I saw in real time, and I'm seeing it in the women in my network, that they want to be part of what's next. They want to be part of the solution. And so whether, I don't think that having sort of pay-to-play jobs or that corruption is what we're asking for. I think what we're saying is, let us have a seat at the table.
So, a couple things on this. So I don't think it's one or the other. So I'm not disagreeing with you or with Sleep. Not that I have any issues disagreeing. You know, I don't. But what I'm saying, I guess, is this, which is, and I want to be very clear. Black folks are not a monolith, and what I am saying here is a suspicion with a little bit of focus group data. Not that I can't say it's completely proven, but it is the idea that, for example, almost no one who is a progressive who runs for office talks about jobs and contracts. No one talks about diversifying professional services. No one talks about what it looks like to diversify infrastructure projects. These are hard, durable things that folks can see. And when there's an institutional memory, for example, of the Dan Ryan being built through my neighborhood and having nobody with any license plate from my state, much less who looked like me, building that matters, right? And so that is an example. Like, I want to own the business, right? I want a chance to have access not just to money, but to wealth. And that somehow that's bad because capitalism is bad, and so therefore, like, we have to fight against that. And by the way, the people who are most hurt by capitalism are black people, so therefore, like, you can't have capitalism. Like, that doesn't hunt. That doesn't instinctively hunt. It's not a thing, right? People want the dignity of work and the dignity of ownership. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And we need to talk about what the conditions of that are and what it looks like in a system in such a way that it doesn't hurt people unnecessarily. There's all these externalities, but, like, it is not as simple as saying, you know, capitalism's always been bad and always been bad for black people, therefore, like, we've got to do this. Second thing is, I think that, how do I put this? So, there are a lot of arguments to be made about, for example, the Clinton years, especially sort of Bill Clinton and what his policies meant for people who look like me. Like, not all of it as bad as people say, but some stuff that ain't great, especially on prison reform, for example. There's a lot of folks who also remember Bill Clinton playing the saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show, right? And sort of what that meant in terms of validating culture and saying, I am here to listen and accept. Now, there's some of that you could argue is like tokenism and kind of screwed up, I get that. But I would also argue, for example, I'm just being real, but for example, like, Bernie Sanders is really white. Like, I'm just, and I don't mean that, and to be clear, I'm using crude terms to talk about this, but it's sort of this idea that, like, we can't have any conversation about sort of like culture identity. There is no, by the way, conversation in many progressive circles about the role of faith, right? About going to church, about what that means, what that looks like. And when you leave all of that stuff to the side, and all you want to talk about is issues, in some ways, you are sort of arrogantly invalidating part of people's life experience. And when you combine that with sort of an economic platform that doesn't necessarily talk about inclusion directly, you leave yourself vulnerable. This isn't saying these two things can't be reconciled. It's saying that when I even broach these topics, or Sleep or Sawyer, there's this instant sort of defensiveness, like, how dare you attack my holy progressiveness? And that's not acceptable. And it's part of the reason why people don't feel heard, is all I'm saying.
Well, are the terms progressive and socialist themselves, it seems like that's part of the problem, is because you're talking about certain policies, whether it's Medicare, access to college, that are very popular. They're going to be popular everywhere. They're popular in the black community. But when you wrap them up, this is a democratic socialist, I don't know, is that part of the issue?
In my personal opinion, again, I don't know that that's the issue. I think there's sort of, with older people in general, just because of sort of how socialism is associated with, like, the Soviet bloc and sort of bounce China and sort of let a thousand flowers bloom, you're going to have some of that inherent resistance. I don't know that that's true necessarily of people in my generation or even sort of 10 or 15 years ahead. I think it is more the way we talk about policy, the way we talk about race, the way identity politics has sort of become this thing that gets vilified within the party as being inherently bad because we need to have class consciousness. In those sort of ways, when that all sort of gets blended together, I think that's where we run into trouble, personally.
And it's funny because I was just remembering as Mick was talking that you were a theology major and I was a philosophy major, so this is perfect. But I do think it is about messaging, and I do also think it is about the messenger. Bernie Sanders is white, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not. Andrew Gillum is not. So there is a movement that is not white within the progressive movement, and I think there is a challenge for progressives to welcome people of color. I think it's a challenge for the establishment to welcome people of color in a meaningful way in terms of leadership. This is not unique to one section of the party. It's a problem across the board. But on some of these ideas, I realized when I was, when you talk to people, people aren't thinking about, a bill number or a policy in the way that, a policy wonk or someone who's, legislating is thinking about it. They're thinking, what is my problem and how are you going to solve it? And the language just has to be simpler and not talking down, but just like, how are you solving my problem? What are you doing for me? And meet people where they're at. And one thing I actually said here a few months ago, right after the primaries, I think the challenge is that there's people that would join us and we have to be welcoming to them in a way that I think even progressives could be better at. We don't need to be pure, have this purity politics. Like, you are knocking on doors in Iowa, so you better just, you're not part of my club. That doesn't help us grow and build a movement. We need to, there are people who are still, with her, but they want Medicare for all. I want to talk to those people, because those are people who I can work with, because they on policy they get it, or that they are concerned about, police brutality, and they want to see a change, and they don't want $95 million to go to a cop academy. Those are people I want to talk to because they get it. There's something on which we have common ground.
And so I'll say two things to that, which is, I think, one, I totally agree. It's about addition, it's about multiplication, and we're the intent party, and always have been. The only attenuation I would make in what Sameena just said about messaging is I think you also need to talk about it needs to be grounded in values, right? In addition to sort of like, what are you doing to solve my problem? It's also, do you see me? Do you get me? Do you see where I am? Have you taken the time to consider that perhaps my perspective is just as valuable as yours and may in fact add something to you as a candidate, you as a party, you as a person? And I think that saying like what again, going back to the Clinton example and putting aside the policy stuff like that, there was something that made people feel that he saw them. Whether it was true or not, there was something that said, this guy's authentic, and when he looks into my eyes, he is seeing my pain. He said, I feel your pain, but with more drawl, right? I mean, but it was something that sort of said, I'm connected. Like, you, when I look at you as a voter, you individually as a person, you matter. And I think that there is something, and it's one of the things that the Obama campaign did well, was this sort of one-on-one organizing work in a way that talked about stories, made people feel connected. I think it's something, frankly, that we as a party structure have gotten a bit away from, and my hope is that in the limited time that I have here, that I can help instill some of that.
Let me ask you guys, all you guys, Ben, weigh in as well. Are the Democrats ready for November? We keep hearing about a blue wave. Is it going to be blue tsunami? Is it going to be more like a gentle lapping at the shore? What do you guys think? Is it enough to be anti-Trump? Where are we?
Somebody said yes.
In this audience, in this room, yes.
Well, so here's. Are we ready? I'd say that's hard to say. In my professional capacity, I think the answer to that question is yes. We built a very large organization. The volunteer organization that the Pritzker folks have built in coordination with Kwame and the party, and et cetera, is large, expansive, making more sort of like knocks and phone calls than I have seen in any statewide race in the past couple of years. I think the answer is no, we can't just be anti-Trump. I think that presenting a real and positive message is important. Is it Medicare for all, for example? No, it's not, but it is talking about a public option for Medicaid, right? It's being able to run loudly and proudly, and this is, to be clear, not as the whole party, because there are people who the party is supporting downstate who aren't necessarily on board with this, but saying, we believe a progressive income tax makes a hell of a lot of sense. We ought to be paying higher taxes for higher incomes, lower taxes for lower incomes. We are presenting people, I think, an alternative message about what the state of Illinois could look like versus what it has looked like over the past 4 years. When you sort of combine the deep unpopularity of Rauner and Trump with a vision that is inclusive of working people, that protects a woman's right to choose, that talks about revenue in a progressive way, I think we've got a really, really good shot. And most importantly, the infrastructure to, once we've delivered that message, actually pull people out to vote. So I think we're going to get there. I feel very confident in us getting there. The question is going to be after the quote-unquote blue wave, what is the durable infrastructure that we build? How, in addressing what Sameena talked about earlier, are we dealing with getting more down-ballot candidates into office? How are we especially making sure that we are mindful, and specifically mindful, of getting people of color, especially women of color, involved, since they have done the throw-weight work of being our base for the last 45 years?
Yeah. I'm just going to share an anecdote in response to that. About a year ago, I was at a nonpartisan women candidate training, and they had a panel from both parties. One was the Republican side, and we were on the Iowa-Illinois border, so both states were represented. And on the Republican side, they had three women, two kind of middle-aged women and a millennial, and they had sort of the same sort of age mix on the Democratic side. And the Republican woman was just, we've got a lot of money, we were ready to help you, whatever you need. And they had a woman of color on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, it was three white women. And one of the Democratic women said, we just don't have any money. And I thought, oh my God, this is like my worst nightmare. This is an area where you're going to have people running for school board and races that would be potentially, nonpartisan. And this is where you recruit your future, senators, congresswomen, and that's, to me, was a missed opportunity. You know who else is really white? Mike Madigan. So we need to really seed and fund women at all levels, and I hope that I never have to see a panel again where on the Illinois Democratic side, a woman is saying, we can't do anything for you, because that's where we're gonna lose people.
Well, I'll just, the question Mick asked that I want to zero in about Trump. And Sameena's been on my show many times, Christian's been on it, and always ask the guests, that question. And the question is, can the Democrats win by just running against Trump? And pretty much everybody, it's like the right answer is say no, we need programs, etc. And I've heard every answer that so many different politicians and elected officials have given me, and I don't believe them. I believe the driving force in the November election is Donald Trump. People despise Donald Trump, and all you have to do is speak out against Donald Trump the way Meghan McCain did over the weekend, and you instantaneously get a pro-reaction from voters who will just vote for D. They're just going to vote for the person whose name is in front or behind, however they do it, the D. And yes, I understand your larger point, which is after the election is over, you have to stand for something.
Sure.
But you want to get elected, you got to remind people that you're running against Donald Trump.
But let me push back on that and say that that's a very Chicago answer.
I was just in DeKalb County, man. Everybody was against Trump in DeKalb County. It's not Chicago.
Everybody, I appreciate that your focus group of people at the state fair.
Whoa, wait a minute. You got a focus group of Rom supporters who say they like Rom, and you draw all your conclusions from this. So my focus group is more real than your focus group.
So here's the difference. It was actually an N800 poll, but that's not
that was that poll that Ron paid for, and then it was so valid, Ron dropped out of the race 2 weeks after he put it.
So let me get to my point about tip districts. Okay, so let me get to my point about that being a Chicago answer.
You should run against tip districts if you're a politician of the south and west side of Chicago.
Oh no, we started the T-word.
This is why I'm supporting Ben Juraski 2019. Make tips great again. I'm gonna get hats. So my point was a different one, which is, for example, if we are going to stand up to President Trump, Democrats need to retake the House, right? And the line for retaking the House actually does not run through Chicago. It runs through Illinois 6 with Sean Casten. It runs through Illinois 12 with Brendan Kelly. It runs through Illinois 13 with Betsy Lonergan. It runs through Illinois 14 with Lauren Underwood, right? And those are districts where, in the case of Casten and Underwood, you can get away with just being anti-Trump. But you can't do that in 12 and 13.
Wait.
You cannot.
Time out. Yes, okay.
You cannot.
You better put, Sean Casten better put Donald Trump's head on oh boy Roscom's neck.
Okay,
Because
fine.
that's the only way
That's
he's
a
going to
district
win.
that's elected for Hillary Clinton.
Let me say it louder for the people in the back.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not talking about Caston, all right? I'm not talking about Underwood. I'm talking about those other 2 seats that, again, are vital for retaking the House majority, that are in central and southern Illinois, where some of Trump's tariffs are popular, actually popular, where his approval rating is in the high 60s.
No, I know he's popular.
We're statewide with Republicans at 89%.
He's not popular with the farmers.
He's actually more popular with farmers than you think, especially with
because of the tariffs.
especially with $4.7 billion coming over the top to make sure those tariffs don't hurt. My point is this. This is a fundamental arrogance case of the Democratic Party. Yes, we have to stand against Trump, but if we are actually going to retake the House before redistricting, which will determine whether we keep the House ever again, we have to have this positive message that is about democratic values, about protecting healthcare, about protecting a women's right to choose, but that is not all anti-Trump. Because if we do that, we will keep our majorities in the House and Senate, knock on wood, here in Illinois, but we will not take back
But
Congress.
you know what? It's interesting you say that, because there are some districts where I'm told, don't run on a woman's right to choose. Don't put that out there because you will lose people. Don't run on gun control. I mean, I remember, so Democrats are constantly telling themselves, we have to tailor our message for a certain constituency. We have to tailor our message for a certain district. We have to change who we are. We can't be who we are.
This is Ron's strategy.
Yeah,
That's
but
right.
that's exactly right. And there's a really great podcast that's out right now called The Wilderness. It's from the Pod Safe guys. And Heather McGee, who's a fellow at Demos, said that she was working on a survey, and they were trying to get messaging from all these Democratic pollsters, even pollsters of color. She said every time I got messaging back, proposed language, it was always appealing to this moderate white voter, even from the pollsters of color. She couldn't shake the sort of consultant speak from them. And so that's sometimes the issue, is that so much of what's happening at the grassroots level and at the party leadership level, there's a disconnect because you have this consultant class that is driving it, and they aren't in touch with blooming to normal. There's a group I'm in that Sherry Bustos, I know that she has this class called Build the Bench. And this was, I think, probably some point in early 2017. They actually picked up a couple of seats that they've never held, Democrats have never held office there. So that's something that she's doing, and I'm wondering, like, are there other programs like that that DPI is going to be working on that's going to encourage some of that?
So, I'm sorry, I just found it's interesting that the person you chose is an A rating with the NRA, but that's not important.
I don't agree. I don't agree with Sherry Bustos, but I know what she's doing, which is something that. Look, she's a moderate, and she's in Trump country, and she's not somebody I am aligned with on those issues,
right.
But she's doing one thing, which is mentoring candidates.
But so there are 2 things to my point here. So point 1 is, there's a reason why Sherry Bustos has her seat where she has her seat, and that is that while we agree on things involving unions and healthcare and a whole bunch of other stuff, there are some things that we don't agree on, and she's still a Democrat member of the Democratic Party. That's my point about Illinois 12 and Illinois 13, is it's not about hiding yourself from who you are. It is saying, there are different types of Democrats. If you only want there to be one type of Democrat, that's fine. We will have a left version of the Freedom Caucus, and that's going to be it. What I'm saying, so on the training side, though, this is something I try to implement in my time with DPI and want to see moving forward. This is something that the chair and other folks wanted. We did a training, I think 3 days ago in Lincolnshire with 65 people. We did one in Centralia, one in Bloomington for current down ballot candidates. What I would like to see, to your point, is for us to do that early. There's no reason for us to be doing those things in August. That should have happened sooner, before petitions were filed. That, I hope, is a legacy initiative that I'm leaving at the party. So you're absolutely right. We need to do more training, more recruiting, and especially thinking intensively about, for down ballot school board races, county board races, how are we, 1, invested early, and how are we, 2, making sure that the candidates we're recruiting are not reflective of some consultant speak version of the party, but of the districts and of the demographics of the Democratic Party, which look a heck of a lot more like you and I than Mick and Ben.
I do want to just speak
Cheers for not looking like me and Ben.
I do want to just comment on the left version of the Freedom Caucus, because I've heard that phrase many times. We're going to be the left version of the Tea Party. The way
they're winning. Yeah, so
that wasn't an insult. I was saying if we win.
But here's the thing. There's something that I think it sort of signals, which is, the Freedom Caucus, the Tea Party, it's, Koch brothers funded, it's, dark money funded. Where I think a lot of people, my message resonated with people who didn't agree with me on policy, but they said, you know what? I hear what you're saying about money in politics. I really feel like we gotta get that, that corruption out of our system. And there's a growing movement. There's a group called Represent, I think it's Represent Us, and they are a nonpartisan group. There's a lot of energy around that. I know, and Citizens United is not perfect on progressive issues, but there's a lot of energy behind that. And so we, as Democrats, somebody jokingly put today, where are Ken Griffin and Michael Sachs going to send their checks now?
I don't think that's a joke at all. I think that's a running conversation, because someone is going to go after that money, not just from them, but from that whole network, right?
And I mean, Ken Griffin is obviously going to do Republican candidates. I mean, we don't want the Dick Ulines and the Ken Griffins. We want a people-powered party, and that's how. That's what I feel like is our future, and we have to build that. And how do we build that when we have literally dark money running after state central committee candidates? When we have robocalls going after people who are stepping up and putting their hands up and saying, hey, I want to help build this party, I want to help build this movement, and they're being attacked. So there's more to be discussed than just sort of putting lipstick on a pig or on a Band-Aid on this issue. We need to really confront some of the skeletons in our own closet.
And Democrats are setting up dark money funds themselves. There's a Union One, Fight Back Fund, and others out there. So there is a mentality, and we'll continue the conversation another time when we get some questions. But there is definitely a mentality that it's an arms race, and you have to do what you have to do to win. So Tim is in the house. Hey Tim, everybody say hi.
Questions from the audience?
Sure.
Tim, do your thing,
How about in
man.
the front row here?
I thank you all for talking about Medicare for All. So I want to speak as somebody who works for Medicare for All. Thanks. Somebody who works full-time for Medicare for All as a volunteer, it's not all about electoral politics, and it's not just about whom we elect. So to my mind, it's about Medicare for All people being there with Fight for 15 hospital workers, and Medicare for All people being there with disability rights people fighting to get the raise for home care workers that Ronner has blocked. So it's about, if we want people who don't know what the word Medicare for All means, that they haven't even heard of it, but when you say all of us get together and take care of each other, that's what they're doing every day, and that resonates with them. I think we and our movement have to be out there with those people and following them, because they're doing the really hard work of building a movement that actually puts the most vulnerable people in the front, and they're already taking leadership. So we don't have to do anything about leaders, we just have to be behind them.
Can I just say one thing on the Medicare for All issue too? There's something, if you go back to the issue of people of color, there's a lot of people who are concerned, when and there have been a lot of stories in the last month about specifically Black women not getting good medical attention. And so, there's actually a shortage. There's more medical student graduates than there are residencies. So there is a federal solution to that. We can fund more residencies and get more doctors of color trained to address some of those issues. But that's, I think, a really important component to make that a really inclusive conversation.
But not just doctors.
Yeah.
Midwives.
Yeah, exactly.
Doulas.
Allied health professionals, absolutely.
Ben, the 43rd ward went for Ron, over 83%.
83%?
83%.
And the 8th ward?
I got the 42nd, Ron got 84,
Okay.
44th, 75.
Okay. All right. Could you look at the 8th ward so we could just put a rest in this?
Sure. Also, we got another progressive Black candidate for governor, was Ben Jealous in Maryland.
Yeah,
And also there's Paulette Jordan in Idaho.
Right, thank you.
My man Frank. All right.
We'll talk about raw numbers versus percentages later.
We will say no. 84%.
All right.
I'm Regan Burke, and I used to have Christian Mitchell's job once.
Okay.
And I had to say the things that he sang tonight. And that was in 1990. Anyway, can we get back to talking about the mayor's race, you all?
Let's get to what's important.
I don't have to make any predictions, but really, who stands out to you all as a panel?
So that's a great question. I actually started putting together a list of people who I think are going to jump in. And can we play this game where people like clap if they're excited about this person? This would be super fun, actually. Tony Preckwinkle. This is why we're doing this. Arnie Duncan.
All right, you're out there anywhere, your focus group is.
Okay. Bridget Gaynor. Amaya Bauer. It's, I mean, trust me, I know how to say it, okay?
I can explain.
Don't question the brown, okay? Valerie Jarrett. This is what, I'm just saying this, I'm just gonna say it, because somebody actually typed this under a video. Harold Washington. Somebody actually, I was like, he's gonna be advised by Frederick Douglass.
He's being recognized more and more.
I know. Chris Kennedy.
I heard that. So he didn't live in the suburbs.
I know he does. He does. Rod Joy.
Not Chris, though.
Carlos Rosa.
He said it, he's not running, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Luis Gutierrez.
He's running out. He's going to Puerto Rico?
Just two more. David Orr. Lisa Madigan. Interesting. There you go. That was
So,
interesting.
were you guys surprised by any of these responses, or what's your?
Yeah, actually. I'm curious as to like what people are feeling in terms of who's getting.
What about Lori Lightfoot?
She's definitely running. Yeah, she's running. She's not running for months. No, I think her team is definitely feeling like that. She's got some surge. There was somebody who's been supporting her campaign for many months said, "I'd like to introduce you to a candidate named Lori Lightfoot." So I think there are, but I haven't seen a lot of sort of. I've seen some statements, but I haven't seen.
That's because Ron was running.
No, but I'm saying like no. I saw Lori's. I know people who are working on Lori's campaign. So I'm just saying like I've probably in my own circle I'm seeing people who are supporting Troy, people who are supporting Amara, people who are supporting Lori Lightfoot. I'm not seeing so many of the others, just in my own circle.
Christian, what's your take on the current candidates and the potential candidates?
I'm going to decline to answer.
Well, let me ask you this. Instead of specific names,
Feel free to ask me on November 7th.
Well, what do you think? What do you think's going to be? What do you think's going to be decisive?
I think that, and I said this in the opening, right? I think that having concrete plans that people can latch onto is going to. So I think two things: having being grounded in your story, expressing your values in a way that brings in other Chicagoans of all different races and faiths across neighborhoods is going to matter. And I think the second thing is having a concrete plan for the city that shows that you are ready for one of the top 5 biggest jobs in American politics. I think you combine those two things, that's what it takes to win. And you got to raise some money. And by some, I mean lots.
58%.
What's that?
58% in the 8th Ward.
What's the raw number?
So 84% in the 43rd, which was Lincoln Park, which was Sameena's point. 84% of the vote for Ron in 2015 in Lincoln Park. 58% in the 8th Ward.
Could you Google the difference between percentage and raw number? No.
You know what?
You're gonna need a laptop and you're gonna have to
That is just. I tell you what.
Ben can use this slide rule.
You guys can get a room afterward and work this whole thing. Let's get another question.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Hold on. Question from the back.
Yes.
If a Martian were in this meeting tonight, that Martian would not realize that we are in the middle of a profound violence crisis, judging by this conversation, and that we have the highest levels of unemployment and we have a profound jobs crisis in the city. And I'd like to hear what you all are thinking about what the candidates that we need for this city. We need jobs. I've spent most of the past 5 or 7 years of my life doing professional and advocacy work around Fight for 15 and Chicago Jobs Council, and I know exactly how profound the unemployment, underemployment crisis is. And I need to hear some talk about that tonight.
All right. Jobs and the violence crisis here.
Well, I think in terms of jobs, we as a party, as if we were going to be talking about infrastructure, a Green New Deal, that would bring tremendous opportunity and jobs. But we need to have that leadership across the board. We need to be talking that talk. We need to be having that discourse from our candidates. And I think we're not seeing it across the board. We don't have agreement on that, and those are some simple things that we'd be talking about. As a Justice Democrat, that's what we were talking about. We were talking about green jobs, green energy, and bringing really the innovation that would come from that work. And I think that's incredibly important. We don't have that in our leadership right now. For our city council, we have had a mayor who's taken away resources. I think jobs are incredibly important, but so is education. Because when you try to go for those jobs, you need to be, proficient. So we've seen strategic disinvestment in the south and west sides, and I'm sure Christian can speak to that some more, is that we need to address that. I mean, we shut down mental health clinics. Those are all root causes when you talk about violence and kind of higher order issues.
So I agree with everything Sameena just said, and I think a couple things I would add are sort of what's appealing to me about a Green New Deal and about issues like that is that you are sort of linking a critical issue, which is the health of the planet, with potentially getting people into the economy, the sectors of the economy that are not yet formed, who have historically been locked down, right? So for example, something like 80% of the country is going to have a fresh water shortage by 2030. We are sitting on the Great Lakes. So figuring out how we manage those water resources, that infrastructure, is a tremendous opportunity for job growth. In consultation actually with CJC back in 2009, I worked on the Urban Weatherization Initiative, which is supposed to be a very large state program, about $500 million to weatherize, modernize homes. That got substantially mismanaged by the Quinn administration in a way that ultimately ended up basically tanking it. That money still exists out there somewhere. I'd like to see it repurposed to its original purpose with additional controls in ways that make sure people are getting living wage work on the south and west sides of Chicago. To her point, I think that is the root cause of violence. The biggest way that you can stop someone from picking up a weapon is to give them a job. And so making sure that we also refund ceasefire, which is something that the Governor Rauner willfully cut, is going to be incredibly important, as well as making sure that we're addressing the root cause, which is that jobs crisis. And if we can do it while helping keep the planet from getting warmer, which is, by the way, not just this big green egg-headed thing, when something goes wrong with the planet, the people who suffer first tend to look like me. So if we can do these things at once, I think we can substantially advance the cause.
I'm John McDermott. A question for the whole panel, including Mick and Ben. In the wake of Mayor Rahm's announcement this morning, what does that do to the dynamics of aldermanic races? And are there some particular incumbents or challengers who are in a better place than they were 24 hours ago, in a worse place than they were 24 hours ago?
I'd say anyone who was appointed by Rahm is somebody who's a little bit more, it's probably sweating a little bit right now. Joe Moore is somebody who already has a challenger, and I think his race got a little bit more interesting because he's so closely tied. Pat O'Connor, who just last week was talking about whether he wasn't sure if he was going to run or not, and is so closely tied to Rahm. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he decided not to run. And there's 4 challengers in that race. I know folks who are running. There's actually a spreadsheet out there. I think the Daily Line is keeping a spreadsheet of who's running and who has challengers. And there's a lot of, the 25th Ward has 2 challengers, just Solis. I mean, it's across the board. So I think there's a lot of folks who are, if they're closely tied to Rahm, yes, you can't, tie to Rahm anymore, but there's still there's going to be an after effect. People are going to say you voted for this, or you voted to close the schools, or close clinics, or you voted for the Cop Academy. That's on record.
Yeah, John, I think the answer to your question hinges on whether you believe the poll numbers that Christian cited at the start of today's conversation. When those poll numbers that Rahm's people released are true, and I don't know if there are or not, I'm just throwing it out. Well, it's called campaign propaganda. And if those poll numbers are accurate and that Rahm is indeed popular throughout
what I said.
You said he had support of over 50%. That implies popularity. Then I think that the aldermen who supported Rahm through thick and thin have nothing to worry about. If you believe, as I do, that those numbers are not an accurate reflection of where the electorate is right now, I would say that any alderman who supported Rahm wholeheartedly for the last 4 years has got some dancing to do in this run for re-election.
Yeah, so all I would say is, just on the technical side, I would say for people, I think the wards that become, a couple things. First of all, I don't know if y'all are Marvel fans, like basically this is Ragnarok, right? Like it's like the fall of Asgard, like everything has sort of changed. I saw somebody literally facepalm, which I'm really proud of. He's such a dork. But I think that
He's wondering millennial under his breath right now.
that's right. I think he was around when Marvel came out. So too soon. So I think that I think anyone I think the very walkable districts become very interesting, because that's one where you don't need a lot of money to win. I think in situations where you've got districts that have more 3 flats, more high rises, where folks might have been counting on sort of an infusion of cash to help them run their campaign, and that sort of organized money structure becomes more disparate or disappears. I think those folks are in some trouble if they are not aware of sort of how to raise their own money, do their own voter contact stuff. So I think sort of geographically, looking at places that are really walkable versus not is an interesting place to see where are the real interesting, non-expensive battlegrounds for 2019.
I think it depends greatly ward to ward. I think that, first of all, Rahm is not popular. He may have scored in polls against any one of the previously stated challengers. He may have been at 50%, in large part because most of them don't have very great name recognition. And those that do have a lot of downside as well as upside, Paul Vallis, Gary McCarthy, etc. Ward politics and aldermanic elections are their own thing. It's very rare for an alderman to win or get defeated on citywide issues, including their alliance with the mayor. If they're taking care of their ward, even if Rahm isn't very popular and they're allied with Rahm, they may win again, despite his unpopularity and despite being tethered to him. But if they're not taking care of the ward's changing, then they're going to be in trouble. And several of the names we mentioned before have been in trouble for several election cycles. Danny Solis, I believe, has been in runoffs for 2 and maybe 3 straight elections and has survived them all. He had his ward moved mostly out of Pilsen, which is where he's from.
Well, he moved it.
That's what I mean.
He was the one who engineered that move.
So, people just trying to find ways to continue to survive. But one of the reasons why aldermanic races are so interesting is that there's so many different factors. Did you put in a stop sign or fail to put in a stop sign that people really wanted and they feel you're not responsive? It doesn't matter if you voted 90% with Rahm or 90% against him, although I don't think anyone's ever voted 90% against him. The stop sign could be the decisive issue. So I do think, in the last election for sure, Rahm didn't carry anybody over the finish line. Even his allies ran independent of
Michelle
Rahm.
Smith.
He was too busy.
He carried Michelle Smith over the finish line.
Maybe. I don't know. Rahm was so busy trying to win his own re-election last time around that I'm just saying fundamentally I don't think that's as big of a factor. So, but with the mayor out of the way and one less, person to run with or run against, I think it makes every alderman's, incumbent alderman's race that much more interesting. I think they're all gonna have to stand on their own, and some don't really know how to do that very well. So it's gonna be really interesting.
I also think our ward is gonna get much more interesting. I think, John, you might be in that ward too. The 47th ward is gonna get that much more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
47th ward has an exponential number of candidates already.
I think there's about as many people running for mayor as are running for alderman 47th ward. Yeah.
All right, I think we've got to end it there, folks. Sorry, I know there's a lot more questions. Thank you all for coming out. The election season has just begun. We will be back. We'll be talking about this. Thanks so much to Sameena and to Christian. Really appreciate you guys coming out. See you guys next month.